Anthropic just shipped Claude Opus 5, and one number in the announcement is doing all the work. On ARC-AGI 3, the reasoning test built specifically to be hard for language models, Anthropic says its new model scores 3 times as high as the next best model on Earth. Also today, Stripe circling a $10 billion deal for a 2-year-old startup, and Intel beating earnings by more than 300% and then falling 8%. Friday, July 24th, Anthropic released Claude Opus 5. It is available immediately across the API, Claude.ai, Claude Code, and Claude Cowork, and it costs exactly what the model it replaces cost: $5 per million input tokens, $25 per million output. That last detail is the one to hold on to, because for the last 2 years the industry's pattern has been that a real capability jump arrives with a price increase attached. This one did not. The headline claim is the ARC-AGI 3 result, where Anthropic says the score is 3 times as high as the next best model. On Zapier's automation bench, the pass rate is about 1.5 times the next best. On OSWorld 2.0, which measures whether a model can actually drive a computer, Anthropic says it beats Fable 5's best result at 1/3 the cost. Within 9 hours, the announcement was the top story on Hacker News with over 900 points, which is the strongest single-day attention signal we have logged on this channel in weeks. So let's do the part of the Opus 5 story that the launch post will not do for you. Every single benchmark number we just quoted is vendor reported. Anthropic ran Anthropic's tests on Anthropic's model and published the results. That is normal, and it is not an accusation. Every lab does it. But it means the honest status of the 3 times ARC-AGI claim today is unverified, not false. Here is the specific thing to watch for. ARC-AGI 3 is administered by a foundation that publishes its own leaderboard. So this is one of the few frontier claims that gets an independent scoreboard rather than a vibes check. If the number holds on that public board next week, it is one of the largest single-generation jumps in the benchmark's history. If it lands materially lower, that gap tells you something about how the internal harness was configured. Either outcome is informative. We will report the replication when it exists and not before. 2 features shipped alongside the model that matter more to people building things than the benchmarks do. The first is mid-conversation tool changes in beta, which means an agent can have its available tools swapped while a task is already running rather than at the start of a fresh session. If you have ever built a long-running agent, you know that constraint was one of the ugliest in the whole stack. The second is automatic fallbacks on the API, also in beta. When a request fails, it reroutes rather than dying. Both of these are unglamorous plumbing, and both are a tell about where the competition has actually moved. Nobody wins enterprise deals in 2026 on a benchmark chart. They win on whether the agent stays up for 6 hours without a human babysitting it. There is also a fast mode running at 2.5 times default speed for twice the base price, which is the clearest signal yet that latency has become a product here rather than an engineering detail. Anthropic was not the only lab shipping. Black Forest Labs opened early access to FLUX-3, and it landed at over 500 points on Hacker News in its own right. This is a family, not a model. FLUX-3 video handling text to video, image to video, and video to video. FLUX-3 image for synthesis and editing. And critically, FLUX-3 dev, an open-weight multimodal backbone. In head-to-head preference testing against Grok Imagine Video, Kling, Runway Gen 4.5, and Luma Ray, Black Forest Labs reports FLUX-3 was preferred in between 52 and 93% of matchups. And to the company's credit, it labels those results preliminary itself. The strategic point is the open-weight backbone. Black Forest Labs is the European lab that has consistently chosen to release weights when the American frontier labs would not, and it is doing it again in video. On the same day, Washington is arguing about whether open weights are a national security problem. That timing is not an accident. The most interesting thing Black Forest Labs shipped is the one getting the least coverage. It is called FLUX-mimic, built with Mimic Robotics, and it is a video action model, the same backbone that generates video, repurposed to generate robot motion. The tasks in the demonstration are not toys. Kitting parts into structured trays, inserting electronic control units into tight-fitting fixtures, and handling soft, flexible materials like seals and cables, which is the category that has defeated industrial robotics for 40 years. The numbers are the story. Visual input to world representation in under 80 milliseconds on a single RTX 5090 and a full deployed system reaction time of 101 milliseconds. Black Forest Labs says it recovers from failures without having been explicitly shown how, and needs less training data than previous vision language action systems. The deployment partner is Audi. Watch this line closely. The same architecture that makes pretty pictures is quietly becoming the control layer for factory floors. To the companies, and the number of the day that is not a benchmark. Stripe, the payments company, is in talks to acquire OpenRouter for roughly $10 billion. That was first reported by The Information and the Wall Street Journal, and an agreement could be announced within about a month, though talks can still collapse or draw another bidder. OpenRouter was founded in 2023. It is a router. More than 5 million developers use it to reach hundreds of models from OpenAI, Anthropic, and open-weight providers through a single interface, comparing them and switching between them. Now the valuation. OpenRouter raised in May at $1.3 billion. $10 billion is roughly 7.5 times that, in about 2 months. Databricks reportedly held early talks too. What Stripe would actually be buying is the switching layer, the place where a company decides which model gets the job. If models are becoming interchangeable, the router is where the margin goes, and Stripe already owns the equivalent choke point in payments. ServiceNow reported, and it is the first hard data point against a thesis that has been eating enterprise software valuations all year. The thesis, sometimes called the SAS apocalypse, goes like this. If AI agents do the work, the software companies that used to charge per human seat lose both their purpose and their pricing model. ServiceNow was one of the sharper decliners in large-cap software this year on exactly that fear. Thursday, it reported second quarter revenue of $3.99 billion, up 24% year-over-year, against estimates of $3.93 billion, and adjusted earnings of 90 cents against about 86 cents expected. The number that moved the stock was different. AI products now generate more than $1 billion in annual contract value, ahead of the company's own schedule toward $1.5 billion by the end of 2026. CEO Bill McDermott said agent deployments rose ninefold in 9 months. The stock closed up 7.44%. One quarter is not a refutation, but it is evidence that some incumbents sell the agent rather than get replaced by it. A correction first, because this channel would rather be accurate than consistent. In yesterday's episode, we said DeepSeek was scheduled to move V4 from preview to stable on Friday. That framing was wrong, and here is what actually happened. V4 went generally available earlier in the week. What Friday was, specifically, is the day the old world ended. At 15:59 UTC on July 24th, DeepSeek fully retired the legacy model names DeepSeek Chat and DeepSeek Reasoner. Those aliases are now inaccessible. If you had production code pointing at either string, it stopped working yesterday. For scale, the V4 family that replaces them is V4 Pro at 1.6 trillion total parameters with 49 billion active, and V4 Flash at 284 billion total with 13 billion active, both at 1 million token context. The broader lesson is worth 10 seconds. Model aliases are not stable infrastructure. Pin your versions. Washington. On Friday, 25 American technology companies published a joint letter titled Open Weights and American AI Leadership. The signatories include Nvidia, Microsoft, Meta, Andreessen Horowitz, IBM, Dell, Palantir, Mistral, Hugging Face and Y Combinator. The argument is a single reframe. The United States will hold its lead in artificial intelligence not by guarding one best system, but by building an open ecosystem that diffuses into every sector. They are asking policymakers to avoid what they call premature restrictions on open-weight models. Jensen Huang amplified it in what was reported as the first post he has ever made on X, writing that open models strengthen safety and cybersecurity, accelerate innovation and diffusion, and enable sovereignty. Now the part that tells you the most. Look at who is not on that list. OpenAI did not sign. Anthropic did not sign. The two labs whose frontier models are closed are also the two labs absent from the letter arguing that open models are how America wins. And there was a second open weights document on Friday from a room that almost never agrees on anything. 21 APEC member economies, a group that contains both the United States and China, issued what is being called the Chengdu Statement on Artificial Intelligence. It emphasizes respect for security, data protection, and intellectual property rights, while explicitly calling for support of open-source development. Put those two documents side by side, and you get the actual shape of this week. Washington's own Treasury Secretary has said sanctions are on the table over Chinese open models and that the administration would examine them for IP theft. On the same Friday, the American industry told Washington to back off, and a multilateral statement that Washington itself signed endorsed open source. That is not a coherent policy. That is 3 different American positions on open weights issued inside 72 hours. And anyone building on downloadable models is being asked to plan capital expenditure against it. To the market board. All prices are from live market data at Friday's U.S. close, and nothing here is investment advice. Start with Intel, because it is the cleanest story of the day. On Thursday night, Intel reported second quarter revenue of $16.13 billion. Up 25.4% year-over-year, its fastest growth in 15 years, and non-GAAP earnings of 42 cents against a 10-cent estimate. That is a beat of more than 300%. In yesterday's episode, we told you the stock jumped about 9% after hours. On Friday, Intel closed at $92.32, down 7.89%. So it gave back the entire after-hours gain and then some in one session. The reason sits in one line of the report. Foundry revenue rose 31%, but external customer demand stayed thin. A foundry mostly manufacturing for its own parent is a cost center wearing a growth costume, and the market took a night to notice. The bigger move was in memory, and it started in Seoul. A chip sell-off in Korea carried into the American session and hit the memory names hardest. Micron closed at $920.95. Down 6.99%. That is a company whose most recent quarter showed revenue up 345% year-over-year. This was not an earnings problem. The fear is narrower and more specific. That high-bandwidth memory pricing has peaked, as Samsung and SK Hynix aggressively ramp capacity and erode the premium Micron has been earning on the one part of its business that matters most. Around it, the whole silicon complex was red. AMD closed down 3.29%, Broadcom down 2.69%, TSMC down 2.93%, ASML down 2.55%, Nvidia down 0.92%. This is the trade rotating from who sells the shovels to who has pricing power on the shovels, a different and more uncomfortable question, which makes the index divergence the number worth carrying into the weekend. The Nasdaq Composite closed at 24,975.82, down 0.64%. The S&P 500 closed at 7,411.98, up 0.05%. On a day when semiconductors were broadly down several percent, the broad market finished slightly green. That gap is not noise. It is the market separating the AI supply chain from everything else, and only one of those two was selling off. And then the outlier. Apple closed at $333.02, up 3.53%, on enthusiasm for the new Siri beta shipping in the iOS 27 public betas. Worth being precise, Several outlets called that a record high. Apple's intraday high of 334.37 did exceed the prior peak, but the close of 333.02 sits just under the record close of 333.74 set on July 17th. Close, not a record. Finally, what to watch? The week ahead is the heaviest of the quarter. Microsoft and Meta are scheduled to report on Wednesday, July 29th, and Apple on Thursday, July 30th. After Alphabet raised capital expenditure guidance and posted a cash burn this week, the single line every one of those reports will be read for is CAPEX. Not revenue, not earnings per share, but how much more each of them intends to spend on AI infrastructure and whether they will say when it starts paying back. Second, watch the ARC-AGI 3 public leaderboard for an independent Claude Opus 5 score. That is the specific number that converts today's headline from a claim into a fact, or does not. Third, watch whether the Stripe and OpenRouter deal is actually signed, because a $10 billion price for the switching layer would reset how the market values every model routing and inference broker startup underneath it. Thanks for watching AI Daily. We will be back tomorrow. That is AI Daily for Saturday, July 25th, 2026. Every price in this episode came from live market data at Friday's close. Every claim is linked in the description, and where a number was vendor reported, we said so. Nothing here is investment advice. If this saved you an hour of reading, subscribe. We do this every single day.